things that are happening today, every day, that, if you had said in isolation 2 or 3 years ago, would any of these things ever happen? We all would have just looked at each other and said, it's impossible that these things could happen. But the problem is, fast forward 2 years of a pandemic, I think we have let a lot of our civil liberties decay right under our nose, and we're not willing to fight for it because it's become too tribal, and rights have been politicized. So the idea of having rights, and then standing up for your rights, all of a sudden has to be a decision between whether you're left or right. That's crazy. The reaction to Rogan, the reaction to Dave Chappelle, it's all part and parcel of this thing where people up and down the spectrum have learned what the mechanism of action is of this cancel culture, and they don't fall for it anymore.
Trudeau did not get the memo.
There's a person that's able to escalate it because he's actually in a seat of power, and that's what I think people should be debating.
You mean shutting down dissenting voices from a position of power?
Just because, and he went on the record. He went on the record and he said, "Guys, these views are unacceptable to me." Well, in a democratic society, that's not how it works.
Choice. Yeah, not your choice, Justin. I mean,
we could have engaged them. Views on all kinds of topics all the time. Unacceptable is not the threshold of World War II, World War I, and the FLQ crisis.
Do you guys think that there's a moment here that also is a mile marker on the road towards the state versus crypto, given the actions that were taken 100%. Against Bitcoin wallets? Because that seems to be like a big trend that's going to play out over the next decade or two.
There are plenty
inevitably, crypto is the threat to the state, right? And so, you're going to see skirmishes like this that kind of, hey, wallets that donate are illegal, and,
Freeberg, this is one of the best points you've made. If you look at what this has done for Bitcoin, and you look at what it's done for other cryptocurrencies, this will do more than McDonald's accepting Bitcoin, because this is the first time like a Western democratic state is seizing people's funds like in an incredibly unfair, unnecessary way, which is just going to have more people say, you know what, maybe I should keep some of my net worth out of the government's purview if they're going to seize it anyway. And then now people are going to start looking into the coins that allow people to...
You can't conflate having an enemy with having a different view.
100%.
Those aren't the same thing. Having an enemy is a serious deal, right? Whether that's domestic or international. That's what we had to do in World War I, World War II, and the FLQ crisis. This is just somebody who has a different opinion. I don't agree in mask mandates is what one person says. I want a mask mandate is what the other person says. The idea that you can deplatform one or the other, or fire them from their job, or prevent them from having access to the money that they've earned, or preventing other people from donating money, that's really, it's a really low bar. And I think when you normalize this kind of behavior, it's a very slippery slope. And so if somebody else were to do it, they now have, like it's, again, going back to the René Girard sort of philosophical discussion from last week, one of the things about these stoning rituals, right, that Sachs talked about, that we talked about last week. One of the things that René Girard talks about is it is always hardest for that first person, right? The first person that throws the stone, right? That's how Jesus was able to diffuse that incident as described in the book of John. But in a different example, the first person that throws a stone all of a sudden normalizes it for everybody else after them. And then these stonings become commonplace or became commonplace. So similarly, it's like if you're a sitting Democratic person who just decides this doesn't work for you, you can't flip the script and basically remove everybody's democratic rights. That's really crazy.
Sachs, you had a closing point you wanted to make?
Well, okay, just on this point about Bitcoin, the reason why Bitcoin is necessary is because the tactics that Trudeau is using is essentially to starve these truckers out, to not only basically arrest them, but he's also taking away their insurance licenses. He's basically preventing them from ever working again. He's talked about that. We're going to give you a criminal record. It's going to make it hard for you to get a job. And then most importantly, on top of that, he's preventing anyone from helping them by contributing to them, by making a donation. So he's essentially starving these guys out. And that's the reason why Bitcoin is potentially helpful, is it allows people using non-custodial wallets to make an end run around that and donate and help these people who are being persecuted, essentially.
I mean, he could have just simply chosen to do what Sachs's favorite president, Obama, did with Occupy Wall Street, which is say, great, you have something you want to voice. Here's where you can do it. Just, no guns, no violence. But how long did Occupy Wall Street last in downtown Wall Street and in Oakland and other places? Like a year or two. and you just wait them out, and that's it.
I think when you encounter a sincere protest movement, the first thing you should do as a leader is actually listen and try to understand what it is that they're protesting on behalf of. And Trudeau never did that. He went straight to 11 with this. And I think part of the reason why, Jake, you asked, why is it that there seems to be a common denominator with this and with the Ukraine issue, that the leaders are immediately escalating these situations instead of looking for a way to de-escalate it. And they're doing it with the media egging them on. And so as harsh as Trudeau's rhetoric has been, the media's rhetoric around this has been even worse. You have this CNN contributor, Juliette Kayyem, who's also a Harvard professor, who basically tweeted that Trudeau needed to slash their tires, empty the gas tanks, arrest the drivers, making it unclear how you never get the trucks off the bridge. But then she said, cancel their insurance, suspend their driver's license, prohibit any future regulatory verification. She says, trust me, I will not run out of ways to make this hurt. So you have the media cheering this on, egging on Trudeau. They're doing the same thing, beating the drums of war on Ukraine. What is wrong with these people?
Yeah, de-escalate, and where's the off-ramp?
I think the biggest story is this this Bitcoin thing, because if you guys think about like pre-1960s, like capital wasn't digitized, it was like physical. Like you had to own like a stock certificate or cash or gold or a bearer bond. Today, everything is digitized, right? Like there's a digital record of, who owns what stock and how much is in your bank account, and none of it is tied to your having a physical asset. And ultimately, the law was able to reach into these digital systems and have greater oversight and ultimately control, over accounts and so on. And it's had the digitization of capital assets has had an incredible ability to drive economic growth and investment and ease of transaction. But it's also significantly increased the centralization of assets or the central influence over assets. Bitcoin seems to be the resolution to that. And now you're seeing the ultimate challenge to Bitcoin and the challenge to decentralized systems like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and so on. I don't want to speak specifically to anyone, but there seems to be like this trend line over the last 60 years that's now being challenged, because you could have your accounts frozen any moment, for breaking the law or because emergency acts are induced. And I think you're right. It's probably going to accelerate interest in these kind of off government chain into some separate chain. Anyone can do it.
Anybody can do it.
They're doing it in China, right? And they're
that's the point of the digital yuan. It's the point of it.
The digital yuan is like this incredible.
That's the whole point.
It's like absolute centralization of every capital asset.
Here's where it gets scary.
Think of how dangerous the digital yuan is. The minute you say something that Xi Jinping doesn't like, it's a stroke of a keyboard key, and all your assets
are locked away.
It's a database entry, and you just basically reroute who it belongs to.
Or it could happen in America. They say, you know what, California now wants to have a wealth tax. Anybody who's got money, we're just going to take your money out of your account automatically.
Do you guys think we sound like a right-wing politics show at this point?
No, this isn't a right-wing politics thing.
No, because I think that we have so jumped the shark. There are things that are happening today, every day, that, if you had said in isolation 2 or 3 years ago, would any of these things ever happen? We all would have just looked at each other and said, it's impossible that these things could happen. But the problem is, fast forward 2 years of a pandemic, I think we have let a lot of our civil liberties decay right under our nose, and we're not willing to fight for it because it's become too tribal, and rights have been politicized. So the idea of having rights, and then standing up for your rights, all of a sudden has to be a decision between whether you're left or right. That's crazy.
I don't think that liberties in the sense of government oversight have decayed. In addition to that, liberties in the sense of a social setting have decayed. Because of cancel culture, we've normalized the ability to silence minority or dissenting voices. And this is both in the private enterprise setting as well as in the public setting. And it's, I don't know. I don't consider myself a right-wing conservative person by any stretch. But I do consider myself a person who believes in individual freedom and liberty.
That's called an American, by the way.
Yeah.
It's basically being an American. And I think, as we move on to this recall in San Francisco, I think Sachs made a really good point. Like, what are our political leaders doing here? Are they trying to stir the pot and antagonize these situations? If you look, Clinton, Obama, a lot of people previously were trying to defuse these situations. And then Biden seems to be stirring the pot Justin Trudeau, and then if you look at Trump with BLM, and the immigration stuff, he never sat down and met with them, and he arguably antagonized them. So I think this is a perfect segue into what happened. And, so we should expect a little more from our political leaders. Great point from Sachs.
You just brought up something incredible. Trump railed against these BLM folks, but at no point did he try to shut down their bank accounts and take their money away.
No.
And Trudeau, this was not even near in the scale of BLM.
Yeah, who's the bigger authoritarian? Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, if you objectively, it's Trudeau in this situation.
The scary authoritarianism, as we talked about in previous pods, tends to come from the left. At least the right, you see it coming.
I just want to read.
It's veiled under moral virtue signaling. That's
right.
Why it's so
They're
dangerous.
very sanctimonious. They claim to be the defenders of the working class, while they're actually prosecuting them.
Such an unforced error, so dumb. He's going to lose, right? Trudeau's going to lose.
If a DA was elected and a police chief were elected to San Francisco that said we are going to freeze the bank accounts and demobilize the criminals that are ransacking our city, our people, our stores, would you support that?
No, not if it's an extrajudicial use of power. I mean, the law specifies what you're allowed to do.
Do you think San Francisco's in an emergency situation? I mean, would you support the mayor taking on emergency authority to go and fix the problem, which she just did, by the way, in the Tenderloin?
Yeah, but that doesn't give her the power to go to Wells Fargo and say to Wells Fargo, we want you to freeze all these accounts with no due process of law. That's basically what Trudeau has done.
That's the overreach. That's the line, you think, is go and seize assets.
You should have to go through a court proceeding to freeze someone's bank account, period. You can't just freeze someone's bank account.
The law allows you to do this now. It's called RICO. So you follow the due process of the law. And you can do all those things, Friedberg, that you just mentioned. If you want to freeze somebody's bank account,
right,
you can actually do that. The government has the ability to do that. They don't need to pass this basically get out of jail free card to do whatever you want without any oversight.